Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Our Town, Did You Know? The show that asks the questions you really want answered. I'm Martin Gordon, chair of the Pasadena Community Coalition, whose primary mission is the advocacy for our underserved communities. In today's episode, we will talk with James Farr of the Conversation Live and ask the question, did you know that the Pasadena Police Department has been purported to be the biggest and best organized gang in Pasadena? Our guest today, James Farr of the Conversation Live, is a well-known media personality, writer, reporter, and producer, noted for his frank, piercing, and provocative reporting where he pulls no punches. His recent article in the LA Progressive shows a dismal picture of a police department management structure that is in turmoil. In gang-like tradition, the Good Old Boys Club wreaks havoc on officers, community, city staff, and any others that gets in their way of their agenda. What is that agenda? Power? Control? Welcome, James. and to be honest, I'm not sure where to start. But let me start by saying this. In our town, should we be more afraid of the police gangs or the community gangs, or both, and why?
Martin, thank you so much for having me here today on Our Town and to have this very important conversation. And you raised some good questions. I think, before I can completely answer that question, first we need to, let the audience and the community understand the difference between the two gangs or the alleged gangs. Street gangs, are commonly what we know, what we see in community, right? And it's no stranger to us. Law enforcement, and I kind of raised the question in the article, are they more of a gang, as Lieutenant Sammy Da Silva alleges in his lawsuit, or is it more of an organized crime syndicate when you look at some of the behavior that's happened? But the law makes it very clear in PC 13670, right? And it's right there in the Pasadena Police Department policy for those that need to look it up, page 233. It clearly spells out what a law enforcement gang is. And when you look at the difference between what the state says by PC statute for criminal street gangs and what a law enforcement gang is, the threshold is far lower for law enforcement to be considered a gang. Usually when we see street gangs, we see them activate or participate in acts of violence behind turf. They might identify with certain colors, symbols, insignias, language, hand gestures. It's not quite that overt in law enforcement, although there are plenty of examples with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, what's happening with the Los Angeles Police Department, where various gangs do self-identify. They do wear tattoos. They do outwardly promote their membership. It's a little bit different here in what's being alleged in Pasadena. What Lieutenant Da Silva is alleging in his lawsuit is that there is almost like this clandestine culture, right? The good old boys, high-ranking white leadership within the department that are able to dole out favors, dole out privileges, and kind of take care of officers who sometimes find themselves in questionable shootings, investigations, both, be it internal or external.
Well, let me stop you there, James, because you're getting right into my next question. So if you're part of the Good Old Boys Club, is that part of why we have so many inadequate investigations, about police shootings, about beatings, et cetera, is that the Good Old Boys Club is there to clean up and make sure that some of the policy and procedures aren't followed, that there's no repercussions for that. Is the Good Old Boys Club part of the problem of why we don't have true community policing and true accountability?
I don't think it's that straightforward, right? Like I don't think that there is a meeting that they have.
Are you sure?
Well, I'm not sure, right? But It's not that this is culture, right?
Right.
This is culture, and things kind of happen the way that they are supposed to happen because you're a part of the culture, right? There's norms, there's isms, there's things that happen. What we're looking at here, and as the police department defines it in their own policy, right? And I'm not sure that anybody has ever read this part of it, that 900+ page policy, but it says right here, a pattern of behavior. Right, and that's kind of what you're alluding to. That qualifies them as a law enforcement gang. But what we have, or what we believe we have here, and what I've researched and talking to subject experts, is there's more of a parallel power structure, right? Where in some cases, in this case, Chief Harris may not even understand what's happening down the ranks, right? But there's a group of individuals who they don't self-identify. They won't tell you they're a member of the Good Old Boys Club. But to your question and to your point, when you look at investigations, when you're looking at how some of the discipline actions are happening, it kind of threads together this idea that there is some sort of structure in place that does either reward or protect officers, not in the interest of like a street gang. They're getting money, right, for the gang. That's not what's happening here. This is power. This is prestige. This is the cool kids club. This is more of an internal type of recognition, less of what it appears to be on the outside.
Well, you brought up another problem for me, or issue for me, is that when we talk about the ordinary or street, gangs, is that it seems that part of that culture also is that I've heard more about the Pasadena Police Department's gang culture than I've heard about the street gang culture in Pasadena. There's something wrong with this. We're here talking about the police gangs. I haven't had a major conversation with the chief, the police department, or anybody else about gangs in Pasadena. And it seems to me that part of that culture is to say, hey, we're not going to talk about gangs. What we need to do is keep gangs flowing, or the idea that we have gangs like we have in Los Angeles, which are totally different, by the way, so that we can pad statistics about gangs, interactions, et cetera, get money for the department to buy more weapons, to have more overtime, to do all these kinds of things so that we can have a better police department. And this is part of the Good Old Boys Club that kind of feeds into what's happening with the gang culture in Pasadena. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe, because I'm no gang expert for sure, but I hear from the people in the community that the police and everybody else has more information on what's happening with gang activity and a way to have some interruptions, and that they're not doing that job. And is that part of that culture also?
It's hard to say that the police are willingly not intervening with things that are happening in community to support an idea that they are using that data and statistics to procure additional funding for overtime and other things. What we do see in this lawsuit is that Sammy Da Silva, the lieutenant, what makes it so different, he's speaking out, right? The question usually comes, or the allegations usually come from outside of the department. Mm-hmm. Now you have someone from within the department that is speaking out, and what he is alleging in these financial crimes seems to be an easier way, right? Or at least a way that they can procure additional funding and resources for the overtime and other things that you're talking about, as opposed to willfully, right?
Yes.
Not disrupting or intervening in some things. Maybe I'm just being whimsical. Maybe I'm being idealistic. Maybe I don't want to believe that the people that we pay to serve and protect us would actually go to that length, right? But it's certainly worth a question when you look at how investigations have happened in other instances. It should make the community question, like, what's really going on Garfield?
I think you're right there, and One of my concerns is that in the article also, there were some specific things that were said about specific officers, in terms of things they have actually done and what happens with discipline. In fact, in one quote, and I'm not sure that I'm quoting it correctly or exactly what was said, but in general, one person was actually disciplined for doing some inappropriate things in the community, et cetera, and actually, allegedly, instead of that person getting the discipline that they were supposed to get, the Good Old Boys Club waited until there was a change in the guard for the police chief, so that one of the members of the white Good Old Boys Club could come back and make sure that discipline was different, smaller, and more in line with, you scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Well, what you're referring to was actually set in motion 3 chiefs ago, right? We have to go back to Chief John Perez. And when he took the golden parachute and retired from the department, because first of all, folks, every chief is in the end of their career as soon as they become chief. And what we've seen in this department over the last 10, 12 years is chiefs well north of 50, right? And so it's kind of like that saying in the NFL, not for long, like this isn't the beginning of their career, right? So they always have the ability, barring anything illegal or just some crazy scandal, right? But they always have the ability to retire. So when Chief Perez retired, the way that the rotation went to Chief Moody, then Deputy Chief Moody, then for her to rotate out, and we got to pause on that selection process, which I think is where you're going with this.
Right.
Chief Moody agreed to be the interim chief for a fraction of the time that that Chief Clausen would be, right? And so by the time she rotated out, Clausen was now in charge. And so you're speaking of the Lieutenant Russo case, which
Yes, I am.
Lieutenant De Silva alleges in the claim. He kicked him, he assaulted him, he battered him so badly that he ended up in the hospital. He ended up in a workers' comp situation. And when all of that matriculated through the investigation process, right? So what happens in that investigation process, the IA process gets weaponized against the whistleblower, right? And so after all of these things were recommended, when it comes down to the time for the discipline to actually be doled out, it amounts to about a slap in the hand. A week's worth of pay, is what Lieutenant Russo lost.
Yeah, when in actuality there was about triple that, the original discipline.
Right.
And then, quote unquote, the Good Old Boys Club said.
Well, it also, if you or I at work hit someone, kick someone, we'd be fired, right?
Oh, of course.
Like immediately, workplace violence, right? If you or I kicked or hit an officer, we'd be in handcuffs at minimum, right?
Maybe life imprisonment.
Perhaps, right? but in this instance, how this did not get referred to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution is where you find the nuance of how the internal affairs and kind of how the Good Old Boys Club, can actually fabricate or construct a sequence of events. And if they don't deem it as a battery or an assault, then there's no referral to the district attorney.
Wow, James, you're getting me a little bit nervous and upset at the same time as I look back at some of the other reports about things that should have been disciplined in the PPD. We've seen lots of articles about, officers, drinking on the job, and then they're slapped on the hand. We even saw an officer who was allegedly drunk and under a bridge with his weapon, doing all kinds of things that are outside of protocol, and that's just swept under the rug and no real discipline. But then we see, on the other hand, a report that there was an altercation with an African-American family, and one of the police officers got a little out of control, and a newbie police officer who happened to be African-American came forward and said, hey, calm down, and maybe touched the officer and said, move back, and that officer pushed her hand away, told her to go sit down and mind your manners and mind your place, and the next thing we know, that person's on discipline right away. Mm-hmm. And that person, I am not sure what the final analysis was that, but that person got disciplined, was suspended, a whole lot of things. And so when you look at the difference in how, so she's not a white officer, she's not part of the good old boys club, she's new, mm-hmm. and so she gets the retribution of the police department. Guess what? You had the nerve to touch another officer and tell him not to engage, to beat or brutalize or disrespect a member of the community, and your butt is going maybe to be off the force. And yet I have a guy that's drinking, pulling his gun, kicking another officer, telling them you bet not do this, and there's no retribution at all. There's no kind of discipline. So I'm trying to get you to, what is this telling me? What am I supposed to think?
Well, what it tells you is that, as we said earlier in the program, culture, right? When this is the dominant culture, the sergeant and lieutenant who were involved in that well, it wasn't really a traffic stop. They were already kind of pulled over, and clearly the video shows you intoxicated, drunk, right? Video shows you him handling his weapon. The video also shows you that their decisions really put that CHP officer in danger, right?
Absolutely.
That was a very dangerous situation. That video shows you, a fugitive style, like Hollywood blockbuster manhunt, right, with 12-gauge shotguns out in the desert ravine. It shows you that, but the behavior also shows you that there was no fear of consequences. The arrogance in the language that the officer used was that really nothing was going to happen to him. And so then you move a few years forward where you see officers on duty at a party, and police like to use this term spontaneous response, right? When they're interviewing a witness, right? Or getting a statement from you. And then they may come back and ask you again, how did you see this? How did that work? They'll ask you 4 or 5 times, right? They won't let you see the video, but they'll ask you. They want to get your immediate reaction, right? Because that's the one that they want to commit you to, right? What we see spontaneously in that video is officers very comfortable taking those shots of tequila, very comfortable drinking, and believe that's not the entire video. What was released was only 1 minute. So it wasn't, there's context in front of that, there's context behind that. But to your point about the officer, Crutchfield, who was intervening with Officer Palacio back in February earlier that year because he was perhaps a little bit hot-headed and came in hot and hard, running down the street from the station, probably absent of all of the facts of what was going on, understanding that this family, it wasn't a commotion, it wasn't an altercation. They were grieving out loud, right? They were having a very vulnerable moment where they had just learned and just saw the critical incident video released by the sheriff's department of their father being shot and killed, Mr. Charles Towns, up in Pasadena earlier that year. So there was a whole lot going on there. Your point about Officer Crutchfield, who intervened, is yes, she is a black officer. The officer at the party serving alcohol, her cadet mate in the academy, who is not white, not black, but was serving the officers at the party. Nothing has happened that we know of. And so what this again signals, Martin, is there is a culture within this department that certain behavior is acceptable, certain behavior is tolerated, and in some cases, we're starting to see through some of this litigation, it's encouraged. I can't go into the monkey, but I'm still, yeah, that's.
I want to stop you there for a second because all the things we've been discussing up to this point show this white police officer culture that concerns me.
Are you sure it's only white though?
Well, because I'm getting ready to ask you a question about that.
Okay.
I'm getting ready to ask you a question about that because I looked at, well, the African American officer who was said you probably shouldn't be doing that and got herself in trouble. We look at other African American officers who might be afraid to move forward and say something because of the good old boys club, and that whistleblowers are now saying, wait a minute, if you're treating African American officers differently, if you're saying you're not part of the good old boys club, if you're not, if we do something wrong and you say, hey, you shouldn't do that, like the young sister did, are we as African American officers or officers of color, and maybe if we're white officers who don't see that culture as being what we're about, are we in jeopardy? Should we be afraid? What should we be doing?
You know, should we be afraid is a fair question, right? And I think before Lieutenant Da Silva's lawsuit and allegations that there's a gang within the department, I think we were already afraid, right? Like that. I don't think this makes the community any less afraid, right? I think, we've seen through the OIR independent review that how when you look at the Pasadena Way, right? And one of those 8 tenets that the department has on their website, one of them that just stands out and screams off the page is how we get the job done is just as important as getting the job done. And so what we're seeing through this process is culture, behavior, actions, output, right? And so when we look at what that output is, with that final product, right, the community doesn't need me to say it. They don't need you to say it. They can read it for themselves. And of course, you should question it. So should we, your question earlier in the show was, should we be afraid of street gangs versus, the alleged gangs in the police department? Well, I don't think I'm any less afraid of either, right? I think I have one expectation over the other, but while I'm not a gang expert in either space, I've been in community and I don't feel less safe around, quote, street gangs, but I do question sometimes the motives of police officers because when I was looking into the story, Martin, I talked with several officers, and I've talked to officers over the years, and one officer told me, you know who's more afraid of the police than a black man? I said, who? Like I'm like,
come on, tell me something,
like,
brother.
Who? This officer said other officers.
James, stop right there. This was my point. This was the point I was trying to get to. The community already knows it. Me, personally, I've been around a long, long time. You call me the old man. So I know that when I get stopped by the police, when I'm around the police, that as an African-American man, I know that every stop could be my last stop. Mm-hmm. Because we know this historically.
Yes.
But now I'm looking at people in the police department with this whistleblower type lawsuit, people kicking people saying, hey, with this good old boys club, if you don't go along to get along, you're going to be in trouble. We're going to ostracize you. You're going to be the first through the door. Like you see on TV. Mm-hmm. I'm starting to get scared. Should police officers, you're right, but you get to the point, as a police officer, me personally, I would start looking around saying, what do I need to do to solidify my own safety? And here's what I would say, not me particularly, but if I was in that position, I'd go like, is it worth it for me to whistle blow that this is happening or that is happening, or bring this to the chief, or bring it to IA, or bring it, or should I go along to get along before I get kicked in the shins, or worse?
Or worse.
So I am saying, just like in the community, especially as an African-American man, I'm always concerned when I'm stopped by the police, even for a traffic ticket. Last time I was stopped for a traffic ticket, I stopped, I rolled my windows down. I'm a grown man in a suit. And I rolled the window down, threw my hands out the window, and said, I'm ready. And they said, please get out of the car. What for? I didn't ask them what for. I got out of the car. I said, my knee hurts. Please allow me to put my hand down so I can crawl out of the car before you shoot me. I'm afraid anytime. Now, as a police officer, I'm feeling like I'm a little afraid myself. And that's a scary thing, to be afraid of your workplace environment. I mean, to me, this is an unsafe work environment.
I mean, you know, again, digging more into De Silva's lawsuit, when you look at some of the behavior, right? And you know, us civilians, us lay people, you know, we sit back and say, and you guys have guns? You know what I mean? Like either there's a lot of restraint and discipline, but everyone in this building has guns, and these are some of the games and shenanigans and really locker room type, you know, juvenile behavior that you see, you know. But again, you have a culture where there was a time when there was a Punisher flag in the gymnasium, at the gym, at the police department. Culture, right? This is what we're putting out there. So what happens with some of these officers, right? You know, police being a paramilitary structure, right? It's order, 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 order. You follow orders because your life depends on it, and the person with you, life depends on it, and the person above you is told. That's police work. It is a paramilitary environment, right? And so what happens with many of these officers, if they make it to 15 years, right? If they're not like potentially a Crutchfield who may be washed out, or many young officers who don't kind of go along or get in, or we kind of say, this ain't gonna work, right? Wash out much earlier in their career, or they retire out, medical, whatever. But once they get about 15 years in, right? And now they're starting to see, they're at a much more mature level in their life. They're likely late 30s, you know, early 40s. They're not necessarily looking to go chase the bad guys anymore and be a crime fighter. They want to go home to their families, right?
Right.
But what ends up happening is they're so close to retirement and so far from where they've started, they start to balance, do they throw away a retirement? Because coming forward, as we see with in De Silva's lawsuit, his career is over.
Oh, it's over.
There's no more advancement. There's no lateral transfers anywhere else. At the lieutenant level, he's management, so he does not have the protection of the union. And so what ends up happening to those officers about 15, 20 years in, they start looking at the sunset, right? And then you ask the retired officers, well, why don't you say anything, right? All right, you retired, you washed out, you're done. You could tell everything. Oh, no. Because remember what we said earlier, who's more afraid of the police is the police.
Well, this is interesting for a couple of reasons. Because we know the Pasadena Police Department has done a horrible job of investigating police violence and abuse against the community. And I mean, that's very, very evident in the OIRs and very, very evident in the Anthony McClain shooting and in the Christopher Ballou beating. And it was a beating. And so I'm going to go off a little bit on this, is that, you know, this idea of the Pasadena way. I went through the police academy, a number of police academies here in Barney Melekin asked me to go to police academy here.
Citizens Academy.
Yeah, Citizens Academy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If I went to the real police academy,
they
would have never let me in there.
They give you real guns at the police academy.
Yeah, well, they give you a real gun in the Citizen Police.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I shot it a couple of times, but they took it away from me quickly. Come on, I'm getting off point here. Is what happened there was no real concrete investigation for Christopher Ballou, for Anthony McLean, and if we talk about the Pasadena Way, which they talk about in the Citizens Police Academy, it says we look at protocol, we look at the protocol, and then we say this is within the protocol, quote unquote, even though sometimes it's not. And then you move to the other side and say this is Pasadena, and the people on that Pasadena, like we have a citizen police oversight now, but at that time they had an oversight. It said you get to look at it, the community, and say, is this how we want our police to act? And in the Christopher Ballou case, it would be clearly, no, we do not. And therefore, we need to change policy to do that. But at this point, we don't even have that anymore. And plus, it wasn't very, very good the way they did that. So if they couldn't get Christopher Ballou right, and we can't get the district attorney to prosecute anybody on these egregious circumstances, how could we expect, I heard the chief say, or I read somewhere, we've got these allegations about serious issues within the police department. We're going to investigate it. We're going to investigate it? Explain it to me. How can we ask them, where should we go for an investigation? Obviously, you're not going to do it for the community. Obviously, the police in the department are afraid to death of you. If you say, get outside the blue line, how are you going to investigate yourself? We already know you're not doing a good job of investigating yourself on police shootings, et cetera, but now you're going to investigate someone investigating you in the police department? Where the hell are we going, James?
I think where we're ultimately headed is a consent decree.
I knew you were going to say it.
I think at this point, and out went optimism of congruency, right, with what Chief Harris said in terms of transparency, community, and, here to make a change and a difference, right? Remember I said chiefs are at that sunset of their career?
Yeah. He's
fully vested. He can walk away from Pasadena and live a very nice life, right? And I would wish him well. In this instance, the fact that, at least publicly, right, there seems to be no appetite from the council, with the exception of Councilmember Hampton. The other 7 have not said anything, right? They rightfully so say it's under litigation and they can't comment. But you and I both know that they can comment, right, because Hampton comments often, right? And so they can. They choose not to. That's a different conversation about campaign contributions and the need for law to be pro-law enforcement to stay in office. But again, with someone like De Silva coming forward and the chief saying, when you look at his statement, since my tenure here, I have seen no evidence in transparency, right? Bit of arrogance in that response. I mean, others think that perhaps what they were looking for him to say is, hey, I ain't got nothing to do with this, right? My hands are clean. I just got here. They told me it was a mess. It's alleged that he's been mentored by Chief Perez, right? So they told me it was a mess. I just didn't know what kind of mess, right? And so what I'm going to do, I'm speaking as if I'm Chief Harris, is I welcome an outside investigation from the Department of Justice, either at California or the federal. Come in here and clean house. That hasn't happened, at least publicly. We don't know that that's happened. And so if by the time he's got into position, he asked for 6 months to evaluate the department, look at everything that's going on, look under every rock, check every corner, look in all the closets, check the wiring, do all of that, right? We're now coming up on 9 months, and all of those skeletons from the past are coming forward. And if he expects us to believe, the community to believe, that they are going to be able to do an adequate job investigating themselves. As sure as it's 100 degrees outside right now, I'm gonna tell you it's snowing. We don't believe it, right? It's just.
Well, James, now you get me to the next piece of this conversation, and you've kind of alluded to it while we're discussing this, is that the chief is between a rock and a hard place.
Is he really?
You know?
But seriously though, is he really? What,
No, I want to tell you.
I'm gonna listen.
I want to tell you
Okay.
what this means. He's between a rock and a hard place, not because he doesn't have the authority. I was looking down here at my notes. I said, does the chief really have the ultimate power to hire and fire? And can and will he use it in the interest of justice? Yes, he does. You know, we made it very clear. But being between a rock and a hard place says there's the thin blue line. And as the chief of police, where members of my command staff are alleged to be part of the good old boys club, what's going to happen to me if I begin to investigate them with the rank and file or with those other police officers who are afraid? And so I show I'm not afraid and I'm going to really root this out. Are the other rank and file going to say, well, everybody else on the police force is going to get on us if we get on board? Well, a consent decree seems like, wow, we really need it, because that's what I mean. I'm not saying he can't do it, he shouldn't do it, or whatever, but it looks like we have a full-out mess.
Well, I raised this question in the article, in the LA Progressive article. Will Chief Harris be our Willie Williams, or will he be our Daryl Gates? Right. And so for your audience, Daryl Gates, former LAPD chief, right? Documented racist. I mean, just all of that.
I'm gonna beat your butt.
Right. Willie Williams, when he came in, wanted to reform the department. He wanted to hold officers accountable. But in that large organism of over 10,000 sworn officers plus thousands of civilians, right, there was no way he was privileged, right, to all of the stuff. This is what I was saying earlier, this parallel power structure, right? They don't know what's going on all the time at the top. And so when the information is being presented to him, to a chief in such a way, and they're ruling and making a decision, similar to how Chief Harris has terminated officers, that their infractions happened before he got here. He makes those decisions based upon what the internal affairs investigations and recommendations are.
So what's interesting is that he has terminated some people. He has made some decisions. There are new things coming up now.
Sure.
And we have to applaud him for doing that, because I think under the circumstances, if I was chief, I'd be a little nervous my own self.
Applaud him for terminating?
You know, for terminating people appropriately. I thought that's what you...
That's not what I mean. What I'm saying is when you get into that IA portion of it, this is where you're saying, and what we're all saying, what we're seeing in this lawsuit is how that investigation is baked determines what slice of that cake is served to the chief.
Okay.
So,
and so
in some of these instances, these are officers who have been fired arguably, right? We go right back to Crutchfield.
I get your point.
Right.
I missed that undercurrent there.
Yes.
Because now you can use what you just said, which I didn't get from what you were saying initially, is that if I get a report and he's not part of the good old boys club, I get rid of him.
It's already cooked.
Yeah, I didn't get the nuance there. I wasn't listening close enough. I apologize. That is even more egregious than I originally had in my mind. I am, you're making me afraid. You're making me afraid that I'm not sure that as a chief, and I believe that the chief has come into a difficult circumstance. And yes, I do believe it's between a rock and a hard place with no place to go. I'm not sure that we have anything in place in the police department, in the command structure, in the investigation structure, that can get us out of this quagmire. I think that there's nothing there. To go a little bit further, James, is I've been watching for years and years. We wanted civilian oversight of the police department. We finally, under John Kennedy's great guidance and some work by the city council, that we got some of those things going. It's really not clear what impact they can have. In this circumstance, I'm not sure if there's anything that they can really do, and I'll let you respond to that in a minute. But and then there's some conflict between what is the Civilian Oversight Commission doing and what is the Public Safety Committee supposed to do and what the City Council's supposed to do. The whole thing needs to be looked at, because the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. And the right hand tells the left hand something, and the left hand goes, that's not what the community wants us to do. And then they tell us, of course, you can't go into personnel matters and you can't do this. My concern is the Civilian Police Oversight Commission really has some power here to educate our community and really get some information out to us so we can understand it better. I don't think that they even realize that. And they do. I'll be meeting with Richard sometime soon. There's not clarity on their subpoena power and some of the things that we can do. Everything doesn't have to come down to the individual. We can look at the beating of Christopher Ballou without looking at the officers who they said it was within policy, and say, if this is a policy in Pasadena and this is okay, this is wrong, what do we have to change in the policy? Make recommendations to the city council, to whoever it may be, to change this. So, because if I get stopped up in Altadena and I tell them, guess what? I'm not getting out of my Mercedes. I'm probably gonna get killed.
Well, first of all, Chris was already out of his Mercedes by the time the officers made that contact. There's nothing in policy that gives officers the right to violate someone's Fourth Amendment rights.
Nothing.
So there's nothing in the policy, right? And
Then if that's true, then how did I look at this AI investigation, and all these things? Well, we know the answer. It's a rhetorical question.
Right.
You're just making me mad.
Right. So let's unpack this oversight, and let's be transparent, have an honest discussion on it. It is a oversight commission that is needed. Right. It is something that even you referenced John Kennedy, the late John Kennedy, but we can go back as far as your other brother, Michael Zinzin and Kappa, right? In terms of calls for. So this is not anything new in Pasadena, but where we have to be very honest, and I'm going to recall you back to February of 2020 when you and I both participated in a mayoral candidates forum, and we raised this same question, right? Now, this is 3-4 months before George Floyd. This is just before Breonna Taylor, just before Ahmaud Arbery. This is before the hit of the pandemic.
Right.
Our then mayor at the time, and I'll paraphrase both of their responses, and our District 5 council member, Gordo, were vehemently against an oversight commission. Vehemently, okay? Both, in a sense, said that they, and when I say they, I'm talking about the city council, is the oversight. I can quote both of them as saying that, right?
I remember this well.
Okay. And so things happen throughout the year. Then we get to post George Floyd, and not immediately. I mean, we're talking early July of 2020 is when conversations around the subject of community or civilian or whatever it would be, but also looming in the background was one event that was waiting to happen, which was the elections of 2020, but then there was the August 15th homicide of Anthony McClain that sped up that conversation to it. And so we would be remiss if we didn't say out loud that the entire Oversight Commission process became politicized. There became a division in terms of the two candidates. Both, Gordo, our current mayor and former mayor, now all of a sudden seem to think that it was something we needed. There were individual camps that were pushing for individual styles and types. And ultimately what the community was told was, all right, we'll just take this as a start, right? So it was flawed from the beginning, but it was sold as a start. This is not a slight to any of the commissioners who are all learning on the job from an institution that doesn't really want them to know what they need to know. So we're in our very young stages, 3 years into a commission. There's a new chair. There's not really been any much turnover on that commission. They're learning. Whether or not they understand the totality of what their powers are, what their authority is, it seems very congenial in the meetings. You know,
Stop, James, 'cause I think you just want to make me laugh. So I think the Civilian Oversight Commission, there's a couple of things, and maybe on another one of these shows, we're going to talk about, did you know that commissions oftentimes don't know what they're doing? And the reason being is that we don't have good training, for commissions. They don't even know what their charge is. And just to back up for a mission, just recently with the John Kennedy naming of the pool, it always makes me laugh that somebody came up and said, after the community said they wanted it named, somebody came and said, oh, guess what, we want to do this. Well, as a charge of that commission is to listen to the community. So why would the commission see 19 votes and then decide to do something else? So we've got an issue with training, and because that's a new oversight commission with all kinds of different nuances of what we can actually get out of there. And I think there's some positive things could happen. But our first independent, police auditor who I didn't agree with initially anyway, messed around, and in 6 months he left, and they had to start over again.
They had to start over.
So we haven't even had a full chance to see what's going on there. We haven't had a full chance to train that group. And some of the group, here's what concerns me about the Community Police Oversight Commission, too, James, is this. On numerous occasions, I saw them talk about electing a chair. And someone said, would you be chair? Would you be chair? Would you be chair? And here's what 5 out of the 6 people that were asked to think about being chair. I don't have the time. I don't have the effort. I don't have this. I don't have that. Get off the commission. James, I was on a commission. You know what they complained about me for? That I was at every meeting. Do you know this is true? I'm at every meeting, that I advocated for the community and what needed to happen. And a staff member at the end of my 6 years, there was somebody who had been on that commission for 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years, stayed on. The moment my time was up, the staff wanted me to off because I did my job, serve the community. And that's what we've got to do for the civilian oversight.
Well, because the community may not know or understand, commissions are advisory bodies.
They're advisory bodies.
They make recommendations, right? Whether or not they are taken or modified or thrown out, right? They are strictly an advisory body, and that's what the Community Police Oversight Commission body is also. I want to go back to something you said, as an example, you talked about the naming of the pool, which was the absolute right thing to do, right? John put his blood, sweat, and tears into that project. The community overwhelmingly said, this is who it should be, right? No one disputes that. Where I have a problem with it is, for whatever reason, the commission made a recommendation that it should be Dr. Edna Griffin.
But you admit, contrary to the input from the community.
But this is the commission's recommendation to move that forward. We won't go into the
nuance of that.
The nuance or even the political expediency of Councilmember Jones going against the recommendation of the commission and hearing the voice of the community, because we heard the voice of the community with the recommendation to the council that they appoint Brandon Lamar as a District 3 council member, and the council completely ignored it.
Wow, wasn't going to go there, but you forced me to.
I didn't force you. I just said it.
You forced me to because you said it out loud. So here is this. Now I'm getting. We discussed a little about this. There's like the randomness of when you're going to listen to the community and when you're not going to listen to the
you're not.
community. Because in that instance, the community was overwhelming, but there were members of the city council, including the mayor himself, who said, we don't have to listen to the community because the charter says we don't have to.
Correct.
So you, Mr. Gordon, and any of the rest of you people out there that think we have to listen to the community, I want to do what's best for the council, and I think this is what it is.
Correct.
That's, you know, I'm not sure if our time's getting close, but this was a good one. This is important in terms of that whole structure of what happens, you know, with commissions, because you're absolutely right. They're advisory, and you know, the city council doesn't have to take their advice. But your charge is to listen to and articulate what the community wants. That's your charge.
But that doesn't mean they have to listen to the community.
No, it doesn't mean. It just said, so they didn't.
They didn't.
They didn't, and that was
This time the council did, right?
Yeah.
You know,
but the other time the council forgot that.
right.
Stop trying to make me mad, James. We're getting close on time, but I want to get a couple of more things in here. I had some notes here to make sure that we didn't do.
I thought I had a lot of notes.
You know, I have so many things that come out of my mind when we're doing these things like that. Let me say this, because our time's getting close, and I want to ask you this. Is community policing in Pasadena just a pipe dream without a consent decree?
I think an expectation of our department in many spaces is a pipe dream without a consent decree, first of all. In terms of what community policing should look like, the idea, it needs to be reimagined, right? If not outright abolished. But it certainly at minimum needs to be reimagined. We keep hearing the same arguments of, we want officers that live in our community. We want people to hire, the department to hire folks from within. Those are all a separate set of issues in terms of the recruitment and the eligibility and the qualifications and someone from within community having the best idea about their local department that they would even want to be a member of it, right? Well, we see that with Crutchfield. Right. She represents that. We've already talked about what happened or is happening or could potentially happen to her. So this idea of community policing, right, with these younger officers who are not from the community, right, who are from these outlining areas, who may not have necessarily grown up in this type of community, right? It's challenging just generationally with interpersonal skills, right? In general, mm-hmm. right? One generation to the next. But there has to be a reimagining of it. It can't not just be, we're going to go buy some kids some toys and do some public relations campaigns. You know, it has to be, community policing looks like the leadership confronting, conferring, convening, even with those that they disagree with or may disagree with them. That's the job. What I will say, what I've noticed as a difference between Chief Harris and Chief Perez is Perez made deposits in this community. Moody had deposits in this community. Clausen had deposits in this community. That don't mean we agree with everything that they did, but they had deposits, all right? We see leadership now where that community angle is all but gone because the leadership purports transparency and community engagement. But how can you be engaging with the community when you're only looking to talk to people who agree with you?
I didn't want to go here.
I did.
But I was confused as, you know, James, we have done debates, we've done all kinds of things. We've talked to every chief, et cetera, and I remember that. I asked you, when are you talking to the chief? And you said, I invited the chief, and due to circumstances, I mean, a lot of things were going on that I think that he may or may not have liked, and then he just ghosted you. He just ghosted you, and he didn't meet, and I'm not sure whether that meeting is going to come. He's going to come on a Conversation Live sometime soon. I hope so. But to me, we know where we're going on the Conversation Live, and we know that there are some piercing and provocative, questions being asked by you. Some that I would even ask worse. And you're out there. You do it. What does that look like now? I mean, are we going to hear from the chief? Is the chief going to come on, or is this just a done deal and we're going to have to wait for a consent decree or something else to really get some more community interaction?
In answer to the Conversation Live, the chief has an open invitation. Several seats can accommodate him and any that want to come with him. And that invitation extends to council members as well, right? If they want to sit down and have the conversation, then we can do that. I received a summons from him after he blew through the stop sign and didn't show up for the interview, and still has not answered where and why not. But via the city public information officer, said that he wanted to meet with me. And I'm like, for what? What is there to meet about other than what we were supposed to meet about? And I still haven't heard back from them. So when there's a pattern in practice of the city and the police department providing information releases to select media outlets, how can you say you are about community when the community is looking for you to talk to the news information gatherers that they trust? They read everything, but they want to read all perspectives, because there are a handful of outlets here that provide different voices, provide different narrative, provide different, it's the same truth, but it's different. It's different in how we may present it and tell it. And so you cannot run to the safe places. You're not coaching at a junior college. This is Pasadena. This is the Pac-12. Whether you go 10-0 or 0-10, you got to show up. These are questions that are not going to go away. And
James, but I got to ask you this question, because this what you said was kind of funny to me. You said, well, you got some kind of offer or whatever for
a summons. I call it a summons.
For a number of people to show up on the Conversation Live and talk to you with the chief. I have never seen every chief that's come on has come on by themselves.
I don't know that they.
Why would they have a cavalcade of people come on?
I don't know what the point of me and two sworn officers and a civilian in a meeting.
Well, I know it is. You're going to jail, brother.
I don't know what that intention was. But
okay. I think our time has come to an end. I'm so sorry that we didn't get to further this more, but I think what we will do is maybe take this up again after we have some other conversations with the chief and some people in the community. I think that I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Martin.
We're always looking for that insight that you bring. And some people think it's the old school that brings insight, and we do, but it's young people that bring home some of the things that we work so hard for. And it's important to us that you bring our visions and our ideas to fruition, whether it's community police oversight, whether it's the media that we have now, or something else. I'd like to say that hopefully we're going to do some of this delving into the information like this for in the next podcast, with some more police issues, some things about the Pasadena Unified School District, some things about affordable housing, 710 stub, and some other things. But I will say this, in parting, if you don't know, you better ask somebody. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Martin.